Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are back in War Thunder looking at another devblog. The Fiat G.91 pre-series has its devblog out, and it came out today. We knew this was coming since they had the video up on Cube. So it's nice to see that they're being prompt with it, like they have with a lot of other stuff. But just as a caveat before I go through this, I have played a lot of jets. I've played a lot of jets of the majority of nations, only played the R2Y2 in the Japanese though, not the Kicker or the Sabre. But I do have the Sabre for the Americans, I do have the Me-262s, the Meteors and everything like that. But I would describe myself as somebody who prefers the accompaniment of propellers instead of jet engines. So if you're looking for somebody to give you a more in-depth look into how this thing is going to perform at Tier 5 against other stuff, I would recommend some other people. There are some others who may talk about this, such as Mags TV, who seems to be very competent in jets, at least compared to myself. So, you know, I would go and ask him instead of listening to my opinion on the matter. But anyway, let's get into this devblog. With its small dimensions and impressive performance, the G91 will indeed be a respectable opponent in post-World War II jet skirmishes, and a worthy representative of the Italian technological tree. This small rascal is no one-trick pony. Make sure to take the advantage of its versatility. The versatility is that it can carry bombs and rockets, and also has 450 cals, which, if we're talking about something which is going to be top tier, you know, 9.0, 450 cals, I mean, it's not great, is it? 4 M3s are not really going to do a lot. We know with the Sabres how they struggle with their guns, and they have more 50 cals than this thing. But maybe the bombs and the rockets will make up for that. It is supposed to be a multi-purpose fighter, and it definitely doesn't lose any of the speed that it has when it has these bombs and rockets. Utilize your payload to the max, or the to max according to Gaijin. Drop a small surprise in between the lines of the enemy ground forces, or unleash the hell by releasing barrage of 38 rockets on a group of your enemies. Once done, you can easily chase other aircraft and participate in the mighty clash of now 6 major playable countries available to our players. So of course reminding us that the Italians are coming, obviously, since the G91 is here, which is lovely. And also the fact that these rockets are not just supposed to be used on ground targets, but maybe air targets. Something I found interesting is it says barrage of 38 rockets. When I read about the Fiat, it had more than that. It could carry either 18 Hispano 80mm or 2 rocket pods with 19 SNEB 68mm. So I'm guessing that's what they went for. I'm wondering if we're going to get another variant in game, which will have the Hispanos. The Luftwaffe did use this aircraft, but a different variant of it, and we will get into that later on when we finish this. But yeah, the idea is this is supposed to be an attacker at the start of the game. You kill stuff, you know, with your rockets and bombs, and then you engage in the fights. Now, since jet combat is pretty quick, and generally match can be over in 5 or 10 minutes, I'm not exactly sure if this thing will be able to get in there, get off its ordnance, and then attack. It may be put into a position where it's severely disadvantaged, and therefore its performance will have to get it out of it. And against stuff like MiG-15s, Hunters, the later Sabres, and now the F9, F8, I'm not exactly sure that it will be able to do that. But we never know, you know, it's still got the possibility. It really depends how this thing performs in game, and after looking at the statistics on it, I do have a lot of promise for this thing being able to fulfill that role, if not do better than expectations. Will it be able to keep up with others and claim its respectable place of the skies of War Thunder? Fans of the Italian tech tree rejoice. You will be able to find out very soon. Make sure to leave a comment, because this one is truly worth commenting. Right, okay. The model is absolutely beautiful. If you look at the pictures, as you can see, they've done a really nice job on the model. And it seems like it's got more than one skin, because if you look at the video, it has this full, like, silver skin on it. And then if you look at the one that it has set down here, it does actually have the green and silver tinge to it. So obviously we're going to have multiple skins on this thing, which is wonderful. Something I would like to check is if you can carry bombs and rockets at the same time, because I don't see any of the pictures where they are on at the same time. I might just be looking at the pictures wrong. I might be completely wrong about that. But I don't see, you know, them being carried at the same time. So that was something I would like to check. And also the fact that are these rockets multi-purpose, or are they just, you know, designed for one thing? Also, how much of a performance hit these things will do, because I know for a fact when flying the F9, F5 Panther, which, you know, I enjoy flying if I do need to fly jets, the bombs do take quite a hit on the performance of the aircraft. So I just wonder if that is the case. Now, I talked about the G.91 before, and the reason I've talked about it is because it worries me. The biggest worry I have is not for this version. This is a pre-series version, which was basically the one which was rejected by NATO. And the reason it was rejected was because of its armament and the fact that they wanted to actually produce stuff by themselves. So what a lot of these countries did, specifically Germany in this case, is Germany took the idea, so they took the G.91 and they improved it, very much like they've done with the CL-13 that we have in game already. And the way they improved it is, well, they put two 30mm in it instead of 450s. And this dramatically increases the value of this thing in game. Not just because it has the stopping power to kill somebody in a few shots, but also because it would mean that it would be in the German tree. And also, it would mean that this would be a 1958 aircraft. And they actually talk about that if you go to the history section of the Devblog. They do talk about this. The first flight of the pre-production version of the aircraft occurred in 1958, and the last aircraft was phased out of its long service in 1995. So we're pushing the boundary here. I believe, I might be wrong here, I'm not exactly sure, but the Hunter F1, which we have in game, is the latest aircraft we have in game. The CL-13 was before that. So the Hunter was actually introduced in 1954, with having its first flight in 1951. So that's a clear 7 years before this aircraft. If we look at the Canada Air Sabre, it was produced in 1950 to 1958. So this was even produced before the first flight of the Hunter, which is why the Hunter is probably the best jet in game right now. It just has the technology. It also has those wonderful 30s, which aren't just good for taking out planes. They're also great at taking out enemy vehicles as well. Really good at doing that with its rotary cannons. It also is very fast. The Fiat G.91 will not be as fast as the Hunter, but it will definitely be a lot more maneuverable and harder to hit. The Hunter is a massive target, whereas something like this is a lot smaller. And also, with the fact that it has bombs and stuff like that, generally it will have much more of a roundabout role to play. Now, as I was talking about, the German version, the Luftwaffe G.91 R3 version, with its two 30mm, is the one to look out for. But not just because it would dramatically increase how good this thing is. The biggest issue I have with it is what it opens up for other nations. Now, I have a few planes here that you can look into and see what you think. But by adding an aircraft, which was its first flight of the pre-production model was in 1958, so not even introduced, we can look at other aircraft which were introduced around this time and were just significantly better. There are many examples of this. This is the American and British argument and the Russian argument for stuff like this. Every time that you push the boundary further, you widen the gap between planes that you could add into the game, which would be a hell of a lot better than this. The G.91 right now, against stuff that we have in game, it would be really, really good. If you're able to not take bombs and rockets on it, if you're able to use it as a pure fighter, if the 50 cals are able to do a lot of damage in the video itself, it seems like it's not doing a ton of damage, to be quite honest, compared to what I'd like it to do. But then again, that's also my experience with the Sabre. But what it does is it opens up the doors to a lot of aircraft which were around at that time, instead of just the ones that we have in game that could be added. The Hunter, in my opinion, already beats this thing in energy fighting. If it's a prolonged battle where the Hunter pilot doesn't know what he's doing, he will lose to the G.91. But if you get a pilot who does know what he's doing, he's going to absolutely trounce this. Now here are some aircraft that you could add in the game which were either produced or first flight or introduced before the G.91, which is also after the Hunter is added, came into existence in real life. So the first one is the Havilland Sea Vixen. This is probably one which is talked about quite a lot, especially on the forums. It was introduced in 1959, but its first flight was in 1951. So this is a whole 7 years before the G.91. It has 6 hardpoints with 4 rockets, 4 missiles, and a bomb. So it doesn't have any guns, but it could easily destroy anything that it has in the air. The next one is the Havilland Gnat, where its first flight was in 1959. It was introduced. Its first flight was 1955, and it was introduced in 1959. This is a small jet which would be amazingly annoying to try and kill. Remember the Vampire and how even though it's kind of sucks in performance, it's very hard to kill because it's very small. Well, welcome to the Gnat. But the Gnat also has 230s, and it could also go 1,120 kilometers an hour. So it could outspeed your G.91, and it could also have 230s in the nose, which are the same, or at least a variant of the same 30s that the Hunter has. It could also carry 2 500s, or 18 3-inch rockets, or 76mm rockets. So this is another jet you have to throw into the mix now that you add in the G.91. For the Americans, of course you have the Starfighter, the F-104, probably the one that a lot of people have been clamoring for. The first flight of the YF-104A, which is the prototype version of the Starfighter, was in 1956, and the eventual model was introduced in 1958. This thing was only retired about 10 years ago by the Italians themselves. They still used it up to 2004. And if you want any information on this thing, go for it. Go and read about it. It only had 120, but it had 7 hard points with a capacity of 4,000 pounds, with provision to carry the combinations of 4 missiles, including sidewinders, bombs, rockets, or other stores. So this was the next jet in the next phase of aircraft, if that makes sense. It was the ME-262 to the 1950s time period, and trying to grow off of that, you also have the XF-104, which was a lesser prototype of the G.91. Now, all of these aircraft outperform the G.91 by a lot. If you look at the Starfighter, this thing could go 2,500 kilometers an hour, and it was produced at the same time. Just think about that. The Gnat itself, as I said, produced around the same time, 1,100 kilometers an hour, faster than the G.91. The Sea Vixen sits at 1,100 kilometers an hour, so very similar to the Hunter in game, but they have more firepower and they are much nicer to fly than something like the G.91. The G.91, if you look at its model, it is very reminiscent of old aircraft. It is very reminiscent of something like, an F-2 Sabre, where all of these other aircraft are moving on in jet design, but were produced at the same time. And if you keep adding stuff like this, you're just going to get people clambering for the other stuff and seeing it as unfair. Because people do want these aircraft in game. And by adding something like the Fiat G.91, you open up another crack in your logic to keep them out of the game. You have to find other reasons to keep them out of the game, instead of just, oh, well, they were produced too late. Because people can then just stare at the G.91 and say, well, you've put this in game, and this is late 50s, all of these aircraft are late 50s, they have very similar armaments, yeah, they go a bit faster, but then you got the Hunter. The only one which is, you know, massively out compared to the rest is the Starfighter, which would be absolutely ridiculous in game, if you think about it. But the other ones, now that you have the G.91, they make complete sense, and they absolutely batter the G.91 in game. And then we've got to talk about BR increases and all this stuff, and should we lengthen the BR stuff? So there's a lot of questions that have to be asked, not about this aircraft specifically, but what it does represent when we look at it in the broader context of the game. But anyway, it is, I see a lot of people happy that this thing is in game, and if it was just the pure aircraft itself, I would completely agree. But this thing has a lot of connotations behind it that we have to remember. I'll catch you next time.